Single mother feeds blind child without knowing he's the son of a millionaire. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead discreetly while balancing 3 heavy plates on a tray. The restaurant Le Petit Paris was packed that Friday night, and her feet were already begging for rest after 8 hours of intense work. Even so, she maintained a genuine smile on her face, not out of obligation, but because she knew that each tip meant one more step toward her dream of returning to her psychology degree. The main dining room of the restaurant was a spectacle in itself, with its crystal chandeliers and imported linen tablecloths. Sarah always wondered how such a refined place had accepted a waitress with no previous experience in high-end establishments. Perhaps it was her honesty during the interview, when she confessed that she needed to support her 4-year-old son, Ethan, alone, and that she would do her best to learn quickly. "Table 15, Sarah," the voice of Denise, the maitre d', cut through her thoughts. "Mr. Thomas Harrison has just arrived with his son and companion. They're VIP clients. Maximum attention." Sarah nodded, already familiar with the name. Thomas Harrison was one of the most influential businessmen in the country, owner of a billion-dollar holding company. She adjusted her uniform and walked toward the designated table, immediately noticing something different in the scene unfolding before her. A tall man with an imposing presence and a severe expression was seated next to a small boy who kept his head down. What caught Sarah's attention, however, was the way the caretaker, a middle-aged man with a professional demeanor, was unsuccessfully trying to get the boy interested in the Braille menu he held in his hands. "David, please, you need to eat something," insisted the caretaker, his voice betraying a slight tone of frustration. The boy just shook his head, his small fingers tightly gripping the hem of his shirt. Sarah approached softly, introducing herself as protocol dictated. That's when she noticed the boy's eyes, a deep blue that stared into emptiness, revealing his blindness. Something in her heart contracted, instantly reminded of Ethan and his own daily battles with anxiety. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I help you with the menu?" she offered, keeping her voice calm and welcoming. Thomas Harrison looked up from his cell phone, his face bearing a mixture of weariness and concern. "My son. He's not cooperating today," he explained dryly, returning his attention to the screen as if that situation was too common to deserve his full attention. Sarah observed the boy for a few seconds, noticing how tense his shoulders were. Without thinking twice, she did something that wasn't in the restaurant's procedure manual. She crouched down near the child's chair, getting to the level of his ears. "Hi, David. You know, I have a son almost your age," she began in a low voice, as if sharing a secret. "And sometimes when he's very nervous, we play a game of guessing smells. Can you smell what's coming from the kitchen now?" The boy for the first time turned his head slightly toward Sarah's voice. His nostrils moved subtly, and a small crease appeared between his eyebrows. "Is it sweet?" he ventured in an almost inaudible whisper. "Exactly," Sarah smiled even, knowing he couldn't see. "It's our chocolate soufflé with red berry sauce. Did you know it grows in the oven like magic? And when you put the spoon in, it makes a special little sound." Gradually, as Sarah described the dishes as if telling an enchanted story, David began to relax. His fingers released the hem of his shirt, and his posture became less defensive. The caretaker watched the scene in amazement, while Thomas Harrison finally put his cell phone aside to pay attention to what was happening. "How about we try it together? I promise it will be our secret adventure," Sarah proposed, realizing she had established a connection with the boy. To everyone's surprise, at the table David nodded slightly. "Can it be the soufflé?" he asked, his voice a little firmer. "Of course, and while we wait, I can bring a special juice that sounds like music when you drink it. It has little bubbles made of fruit juice that pop in your mouth. What do you think?" A small smile appeared on the boy's lips, the first of the night. Sarah stood up, feeling Thomas Harrison's intense gaze on her, but kept her attention on David. "I'll be back in a minute with our surprises," she promised, walking toward the kitchen with her heart racing, not imagining that this seemingly simple moment would completely change the course of her life. The rest of the night passed like a dream for Sarah. David not only ate the entire soufflé, but also tried other dishes that she described with her engaging narrative. With each new culinary discovery, the boy's lifeless eyes seemed to gain a special sparkle, and his facial expressions completely transformed. While serving other tables, Sarah couldn't avoid flashbacks to her own story. She remembered the years dedicated to her psychology studies, the sleepless nights caring for her mother while trying to maintain high grades, and the devastating moment when she had to drop out of college. The decision had been difficult but necessary. Her mother needed full-time care, and the family's savings were rapidly depleted by treatments. "You have a special gift," Thomas Harrison's deep voice surprised her when she returned to collect the dessert plates. "I've never seen my son so comfortable with a stranger." Sarah felt her cheeks blush slightly. "Sometimes all we need is someone who understands us without judging," she responded simply, remembering the techniques she had learned during her time in college. The businessman observed her intensely, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. David, who seemed more relaxed, was playing with the juice bubbles that remained in his glass, a serene smile on his lips. "Mr. Harrison," the caretaker intervened, "we need to prepare for tomorrow morning's physical therapy session." David's smile instantly disappeared and his shoulders became tense again. Sarah, noticing the change, acted on instinct again. "Hey, David," she whispered, leaning in discreetly. "Want to know a secret? Tomorrow we'll have a new soufflé on the menu with salted caramel sauce. They say that when it rises in the oven, it makes a sound that sounds like laughter." The boy turned his face in her direction, interested. "Really?" "Word of honor. And you know what else? Each person who tries it hears a different laugh. How about you come find out which one is yours?" The strategy worked. The tension in the boy's shoulders visibly decreased, and he even showed a small smile as he said goodbye. Sarah watched as the group left the restaurant, Thomas Harrison carrying his son in his arms with a care that contrasted with his austere appearance. Later, after ending her shift, Sarah waited for the bus at the deserted stop, her thoughts still reverberating with the events of the night. Her cell phone vibrated. It was Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor who took care of Ethan, letting her know that the boy had finally fallen asleep after another episode of anxiety. She sighed heavily, feeling the familiar weight of guilt on her shoulders. Ethan, her little warrior, faced his own challenges since he was born. The early anxiety, diagnosed at 3 years old, was just another obstacle they needed to overcome together. As she always did in difficult moments, Sarah touched the small pendant she wore around her neck, a gift from her mother, the last physical memento she kept of her. The bus arrived, breaking her contemplation. As she climbed the worn steps, Sarah had no idea that at that exact moment, Thomas Harrison was in his private office, tirelessly searching for information about the waitress who had managed in a single night what years of expensive therapies had not achieved. In his mansion, sitting in front of multiple computer screens, the businessman studied every detail of Sarah's life that he could find online. Her brilliant academic record in psychology abruptly interrupted. The hours of volunteer work at a shelter for disadvantaged children, the way she balanced single motherhood with various jobs to survive. The more he discovered, the more Thomas became convinced that that encounter had not been mere coincidence. For the first time in 5 years, since his wife had departed prematurely, leaving him with a son recently diagnosed with blindness, he felt a spark of hope. A hope that would make him take decisions that would change not only his life and that of his son, but also that of the young waitress who at that moment was crossing the city in a crowded bus, dreaming of a better future. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. Her deep, dark circles betrayed a sleepless night. Ethan had another anxiety episode during the early morning hours, and she spent hours rocking him until he fell back asleep. Even exhausted, her heart was light, thinking about little David, and how she had managed to help him the night before. "Sarah in my office now." Denise's voice, the maitre d', sounded more serious than normal. The waitress's heart instantly accelerated. Had she broken some protocol by getting too close to a VIP client's son? Entering the office, Sarah froze. Sitting in one of the chairs, impeccable in his Italian suit, was Thomas Harrison. His penetrating, brown eyes analyzed her with disconcerting intensity. "Miss Sarah," he began, standing up, "we need to talk." Denise made a discreet gesture and left the room, gently closing the door behind her. Sarah felt her hands tremble slightly. "Mr. Harrison, if this is about last night, I apologize if I crossed any boundaries," she began, but was interrupted by a gesture from the businessman. "On the contrary," he said, his voice taking on a less formal tone, "what you did yesterday was extraordinary. Do you know how many specialists have tried to get David to eat normally in public? Dozens. Behavioral therapists, child psychologists, nutritionists specialized in children with visual impairments. None achieved what you accomplished in less than an hour." Sarah relaxed her shoulders a bit, but remained silent, sensing there was more to come. "I did some research on you," Thomas continued, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Don't worry, nothing invasive, just public information. Your academic history is impressive. 4th year of psychology, exemplary grades, volunteer work with special needs children. Why did you abandon college?" The question hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Painful memories flooded her mind. Her mother's diagnosis, the medical bills piling up, the sleepless nights divided between studies and care. She swallowed hard before answering. "Some choices aren't really choices, Mr. Harrison, they're necessities." Thomas nodded as if her answer confirmed something he already suspected. He stood up and walked to the window, observing the street movement. "My son was born with a rare genetic condition that progressively affects vision. At 3 years old, he became completely blind. That same year, his mother..." He paused, his jaw visibly tensing. "Well, since then, I've dedicated all possible resources to ensure his well-being. The best doctors, the most advanced treatments, highly qualified professionals, but nothing worked as it should." Sarah observed the imposing figure of the businessman, noticing for the first time the small cracks in his facade of power and control, the slightly curved back, the poorly disguised fatigue in his voice. "Until last night," he turned to face her. "You have a natural gift, Sarah, a unique ability to connect with special children. I saw how you approached David, how you transformed something frightening into an adventure, how you made him feel safe without ever diminishing his condition." "Mr. Harrison," Sarah began, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. "I have a proposal for you," he announced, his voice taking on a professional tone. "I want to hire you as David's exclusive therapeutic companion. Initial salary of $20,000 plus full benefits, including a family health plan and education assistance. You'll be able to resume your studies. I'll pay for your psychology degree in full. I'll also offer housing in one of the apartments in the residential complex where I live to facilitate David's care." Sarah felt the air escape from her lungs. The amount mentioned was almost 10 times her current salary. It was enough money to give Ethan a completely different life, to resume her dreams. But I don't have formal qualifications," she argued, still stunned. "I didn't finish college, I don't have certifications. You have something more valuable, innate talent and practical experience. Besides, you can complete your education while working. I'll provide all necessary support, including flexible hours for your classes." Sarah felt her head spin. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, wrapped in an apparently perfect package. Too perfect. "And Ethan, my son, your son will be more than welcome," Thomas responded promptly. "In fact, I believe his presence could be extremely beneficial for David. Children of the same age, mutual companionship. Plus, the health plan will cover any treatment he needs for his anxiety." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to organize her thoughts. It was a unique opportunity, almost miraculous, but years of struggle and disappointments had taught her to be cautious. "May I think about it a bit? It's a very important decision. I need to consider all aspects, especially regarding Ethan." To her surprise, Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that completely softened his severe features. "Of course you can. In fact, I admire your prudence. Take all the time you need." He took a card from his pocket and handed it to her. "My personal number is there. When you have an answer, call me directly." Sarah took the card with trembling fingers, feeling the textured paper between her fingers as if it were something precious and at the same time dangerous. As she watched Thomas Harrison leave the room with his firm and decisive steps, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change completely. For better or worse, she still couldn't tell. In the imposing Harrison mansion, located in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, Thomas crossed the extensive corridor toward his mother's office. The echo of his steps on the Italian marble floor mingled with the distant sound of the piano. David was in his daily music lesson, one of the few activities that truly calmed him. Eleanor Harrison was the family matriarch and chairwoman of the Harrison Holdings Board. At 70, she maintained the same aristocratic posture and keen gaze that had helped her transform a family business into a corporate empire. When Thomas entered her office, she was absorbed in documents spread across her mahogany desk. "Mother, we need to talk," Thomas announced, closing the door behind him. Eleanor raised her eyes from the papers, adjusting her designer glasses over her perfectly made-up nose. "About the waitress?" she asked directly, surprising her son. "How?" "Darling, nothing happens in this family without my knowledge," she answered with a contained smile, leaning back in her leather chair. "I've already received the complete report on this. Sarah, isn't it? Including some information you probably don't have." Thomas frowned, sitting in the chair in front of his mother's desk. "What kind of information?" Eleanor opened a folder and began to read aloud. Sarah Wilson, 28 years old, single mother. The father of her child never acknowledged paternity. Had a harassment complaint at her previous job at a diner, although the case was archived for lack of evidence. Has considerable debts in her deceased mother's name, mainly with hospitals and pharmacies. "Mother, please," Thomas interrupted, his voice tense. "Don't turn this into something sordid. You didn't see what happened yesterday. For the first time in years, David, it's precisely because I care about David that we need to be cautious," Eleanor cut in, her voice taking on a harder tone. "Have you stopped to think about what a young, beautiful and needy woman might see in a situation like this? A billionaire widower, emotionally vulnerable, with a son who needs special care." "Stop!" Thomas hit the desk, making Eleanor's coffee cup tremble. "You weren't there. You didn't see how she interacted with David, how natural and sincere it was. It had nothing to do with money or status." Eleanor sighed as if she were dealing with a stubborn child. "Son, you're brilliant in business, but you've always been naive when it comes to people. Remember the last nurse we hired? The one who tried to sell information about David's condition to the tabloids?" Thomas ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "It's different. Sarah has a solid history of volunteer work with special children. She abandoned college to care for her sick mother. She has a son with anxiety and still maintains 3 jobs to support him with dignity." "Or that's the story she wants us to believe," Eleanor retorted, getting up to serve herself more coffee. "Thomas, you are my only son. David is my only grandson. Our family has built an empire that needs to be protected. We cannot afford to make mistakes based on emotions." Silence weighed between mother and son. Outside, the piano notes continued to float through the air, reminding them of what was really at stake. "I've already made my decision," Thomas finally declared, standing up. "I'm going to offer her the job. If she accepts, she'll start as soon as she gives notice at the restaurant." Eleanor watched her son walk to the door, her lips compressed into a thin line of disapproval. Before he left, she called, "Thomas?" Stopped, but didn't turn around. "If you're determined to go through with this madness, at least allow me to take some precautions." "What kind of precautions?" he asked, still with his back turned. "Nothing major, just a deeper investigation into her past, some specific clauses in the contract, the basics to protect our interests." Thomas finally turned around, facing his mother with an expression that mixed weariness and resignation. "As long as it doesn't directly interfere with her or David." Eleanor smiled, that smile that had closed hundreds of deals over decades. "Of course not, darling. Just what's necessary to ensure our family's safety." After Thomas left, Eleanor took her personal phone and typed a short message. "Begin the complete investigation. I want everything, Financial history, medical, previous relationships, especially about the child's father. Leave no stone unturned. Putting the phone away, the matriarch turned her attention to the window, from where she could see the mansion's garden. In the gazebo, a private tutor was unsuccessfully trying to get David interested in a tactile activity. Eleanor pressed her lips together, determined. She had spent her entire life protecting her family and their empire. It wouldn't be just any waitress who would change that. Sarah's small apartment never seemed so cramped as that night. Sitting at the kitchen table, she observed Thomas Harrison's card, while Ethan slept on the sofa bed in the living room. The Imam businessman's numbers seemed to shine under the weak light of the lamp, like a beacon promising a different future. "So, what are you going to do?" asked Jessica, her best friend since college days, who had come specially after receiving a desperate message from Sarah. "I don't know," Sarah sighed, running her fingers over the pendant her mother had given her. "It seems too good to be true. So no, $20,000 a month paid college apartment. It's the kind of thing that only happens in movies." Jessica took a sip of the now lukewarm coffee. "But you deserve all this, Sarah. You always have. How many nights did you spend studying while taking care of your mother? How many weekends did you dedicate to volunteer work at the shelter, even when you were exhausted?" "It's not just that." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "There's Ethan. What if he doesn't adapt? What if the change worsens his anxiety? He already suffers so much with changes in routine." As if he had heard his name, Ethan moved on the sofa, mumbling something in his sleep. Sarah stood up instantly, gently adjusting the blanket over her son. She observed his serene little face, so different from the anguished expression he usually carried when awake. "You know what I think," Jessica continued, more softly. "I think you're afraid. Not of the work itself, because you were born for this. You're afraid to believe that things can finally work out." Sarah felt tears accumulate in her eyes. "And what if I fail, Jessica? If I'm not good enough? I don't even have a degree." "Sarah, look at me." Jessica held her friend's hands firmly. "You managed to make a blind child eat in public when no one else could. You did it instinctively, without a manual or theory. Do you know why? Because this is in your soul. It always has been." A sob escaped from Sarah's chest. Jessica continued. "Remember when we met in our first semester? You were the only one who managed to calm that autistic girl during our visit to the psychiatric hospital. The professors said you had a natural gift. But what if—" "Enough what ifs," Jessica gently interrupted. "Think about Ethan, not just about the money or the health plan, but the message you'll be sending him. That dreams can come true, that fighting is worth it, that life can surprise us in wonderful ways." Sarah looked again at her sleeping son. Ethan, her little warrior, who faced his fears daily with a courage that she herself didn't always have, who hugged her tightly on bad days and smiled with all his teeth on good days. "There's one more thing," Jessica added hesitantly. "I got a message from Claire, from the restaurant. It seems that Mrs. Eleanor Harrison was there today, asking questions about you." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "His mother? Why?" "According to Claire, she wanted to know everything. Your behavior at work, if you've had problems with customers, even about your friendships." Jessica paused. "Sarah, this family is powerful. If they're interested in you, whether for good or bad, you need to be prepared." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Outside, the city continued its frenetic rhythm, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that small apartment. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, observing the lights of the neighboring buildings. Her mother used to say that the most important decisions in life are rarely easy. They're like doors that open to unknown paths, requiring courage to be crossed. Sarah touched the pendant on her neck again, feeling the metal warmed by her own body. "I'm going to call him tomorrow," she finally said, her voice firm for the first time that night. "I'm going to accept the job." Jessica stood up and hugged her friend from behind. "I'm with you, I'll always be." Sarah let herself remain there in her friend's arms, observing the city through the foggy window. Somewhere in that sea of lights was the Harrison mansion, with its mysteries and promises. In a few hours, her life would begin to change completely. For better or worse, only time would tell. But one thing she knew for certain, she wouldn't let fear win this time. Not when Ethan's future was also at stake. The residential complex where Sarah's new apartment was located was a world apart. The contemporary architecture building rose imposingly against the blue sky, its mirrored windows reflecting the morning sunlight. The doorman, a grey-haired gentleman, smiled kindly while helping with the few bags that she and Ethan were bringing. "Welcome to Harrison Plaza," he said, leading them to the private elevator. "Mr. Thomas left specific instructions for you and your son to receive all necessary assistance." Ethan squeezed Sarah's hand tightly, his wide eyes taking in every detail of the luxurious environment. It was the first time he showed more curiosity than anxiety in the face of such a big change. The apartment assigned to them was on the 10th floor. When the door opened, Sarah had to contain a gasp of surprise. The space was at least 4 times larger than her old apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. "Look, Mom!" Ethan released her hand for the first time since they left home, running to the window. "You can see the park from here." Sarah smiled, feeling a lump in her throat. Seeing her son showing enthusiasm was a rare and precious gift. Before she could explore the apartment more, the doorbell rang. It was Patricia, Thomas Harrison's personal assistant, a woman of approximately 40, with a tablet in her hands and a professional smile on her face. "Good morning, Sarah. I hope you've settled in well." She quickly consulted her tablet. "Mr. Harrison would like to receive you for lunch today. It will be an informal introduction, just you, Ethan, and David. He thought it better to start gradually, to not overwhelm the children." Sarah nodded, grateful for the consideration. "What time should we be ready?" "The driver will come to pick you up at noon." Patricia paused, her gaze softening when she saw Ethan still absorbed in the view from the window. "Sarah, there's one more thing. Mrs. Eleanor Harrison has requested a private meeting with you tomorrow." Sarah's stomach knotted. The mention of the family matriarch's name brought back all her insecurities. "Did she say what it's about?" Patricia shook her head. "Mrs. Harrison prefers to discuss it personally. But don't worry, it's just a standard procedure. She likes to personally meet all employees who will work close to the family." After Patricia left, Sarah began to unpack, trying to keep her mind occupied. Ethan's room was already furnished with a new bed and a colorful desk. On the wall, a cork bulletin board waited to be filled with his drawings. "Mom," Ethan's voice brought her back to the present. "Is David nice?" Sarah sat on the bed beside her son. "Yes, sweetheart. He's a very special boy like you, except he can't see with his eyes, so he needs to know the world in other ways." "How?" "With his other senses. Through touch, sounds, smells," she explained softly. "You know when you get anxious and we play that game of discovering textures. It's a bit like that with him too." Ethan was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Can I help him learn about things?" Sarah's heart filled with pride. Even with his own battles, her son could still think about helping others. "Of course you can, my love. I'm sure you'll be great friends." The hours until lunch passed quickly, between settling in and exploring the new environment. When the intercom announced that the driver had arrived, Sarah helped Ethan get ready, noticing that his hands were trembling less than normal. In the elevator, she took a deep breath, trying to calm her own butterflies in her stomach. In a few minutes, her new life would officially begin. A life that promised not only financial security, but the realization of long-held dreams. What Sarah didn't know was that at that exact moment, Eleanor Harrison was in her office, analyzing a thick folder with information about her past, and that the discoveries the matriarch had made could shake the foundations of this new life before it even began to be built. The Harrison mansion was even more impressive up close. The car passed through the wrought iron gates and traveled down an avenue lined with century-old trees before reaching the main entrance. Sarah felt Ethan squeeze her hand harder as they climbed the marble steps. Patricia was waiting for them in the entrance hall, her inseparable tablet in hand. "Lunch will be served in the winter garden," she informed, guiding them through corridors decorated with works of art that certainly cost more than all of Sarah's years of work combined. The winter garden was a stunning environment, with glass, walls and ceiling that let in natural light, creating a welcoming atmosphere despite the luxury. Thomas was already there, talking quietly with David, who was sitting in an armchair, his hands running smoothly over a braille book. "Sarah, Ethan, welcome." Thomas stood up to greet them, his smile warmer than usual. "David, our guests have arrived." The boy raised his head, his blue eyes turned in the direction of the voices. Sarah noticed that he was more relaxed than on the night at the restaurant, although he still maintained a reserved posture. "Hi, David," Sarah approached, softly. "Remember me? I'm Sarah from the restaurant." A small smile appeared on the boy's lips. "The lady with the magic soufflé?" "Exactly," she laughed. "And I brought someone very special for you to meet. This is Ethan, my son." Ethan, who until then was partially hiding behind his mother, took a step forward. Sarah could feel his tension, but also his curiosity. "Hi," Ethan said shyly. "My mom said you understand things differently." David slightly tilted his head, interested. "How so?" "Well, she said you use other senses, like when I close my eyes to guess textures." "You do that too?" David asked, his voice taking on a more animated tone. "Sometimes when I get nervous, it helps me calm down." Sarah and Thomas exchanged surprised looks as the children continued talking. It was as if they had found a common language in their different ways of experiencing the world. "Would you like to know my texture collection?" David asked, already getting up from the armchair. "I have a special box in my room." Ethan looked at his mother, silently asking for permission. Sarah nodded, moved to see her son showing genuine interest in a social interaction, something so rare due to his anxiety. "Melissa!" Thomas called, and a young assistant appeared almost instantly. "Please accompany the boys to David's room and stay nearby in case they need anything." As the children moved away, followed by the assistant, Sarah felt a wave of relief pass through her body. It was the best possible scenario for a first meeting. "Impressive," Thomas commented, indicating one of the chairs for Sarah to sit. "David usually takes weeks to feel comfortable with new people. With Ethan, it was almost instantaneous." "Children have a special way of connecting," Sarah replied, accepting the glass of water with lemon that a waiter offered her. "Especially when they share similar experiences." "How so?" Sarah hesitated for a moment but decided to be honest. "Ethan has had anxiety since he was very young. We've developed various techniques together to help him deal with it. The texture game is one of them. It helps focus his attention on something concrete when thoughts start to become overwhelming." Thomas observed her intensely. "You never mentioned this in the interview." "I didn't think it appropriate to mix my personal life with the professional," she explained. "Besides, each child is unique. What works for Ethan may not work for David." "But it's already working," Thomas smiled, indicating with a gesture the direction the boys had gone. "For the first time since he went blind, David took the initiative to share something of his with someone." Sarah felt her heart tighten upon noticing the contained emotion in the businessman's voice. Behind the facade of power and control, there was a desperate father wanting to see his son happy. Lunch was served, an elaborate meal that reminded Sarah of how much her life had changed in such a short time. The conversation flowed naturally, mainly about the children and plans for the near future. "We'll start slowly," Thomas explained. "In the first weeks, I want you to just observe David's routine, meet his therapists, understand his dynamics. Then gradually, we'll start implementing your own ideas and methods." Sarah nodded, already mentally formulating strategies and possibilities, her incomplete knowledge of psychology mixed with years of practical experience, creating a unique approach that she hoped could really make a difference. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the corridor, making both adults smile. It was a precious sound, the sound of two children overcoming their own barriers, finding comfort in each other. What Sarah didn't know was that, while she savored that moment of hope, in another corner of the mansion, Eleanor Harrison was about to discover something in her past that would threaten to destroy everything before it even began. Eleanor Harrison observed the screen of her laptop with an expression of contained triumph. After weeks of meticulous investigation, her private investigators had finally found something significant about Sarah's past, something that could completely change the game. "Ma'am," her personal assistant entered the office after knocking discreetly. "Miss Sarah has just arrived for the meeting." Eleanor closed the laptop with a smooth movement. "Make her wait 10 minutes and then bring her in." While waiting, the matriarch mentally organized her discoveries. The report she had just read revealed much more than simple medical debts or an archived harassment case. There was a much bigger secret buried in Sarah's past, something she clearly strived to keep hidden. When Sarah finally entered the office, Eleanor observed her with calculating eyes. The young woman was elegantly dressed in a simple but appropriate outfit, demonstrating good sense in adapting to her new position. Her eyes, however, revealed a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Please, sit down," Eleanor indicated the chair in front of her. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you," Sarah responded politely, sitting with an erect posture. Eleanor served herself a cup of English porcelain tea, taking her time. Silence was one of her favorite weapons. It made people feel uncomfortable, more likely to make mistakes. "Sarah," she finally began, her voice soft but authoritative. "Do you know why you're here?" "To meet you officially, according to what I was told." "Partially," Eleanor smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Actually, I'm curious about some inconsistencies in your background." Sarah maintained a neutral expression, but Eleanor noticed a slight tremor in her hands. "What kind of inconsistencies?" For example, Eleanor opened a folder on her desk. "Your academic record states that you dropped out of college to care for your sick mother. Very noble. But you know what's interesting? In the medical records of the hospital where your mother was treated, it shows that she had complete health insurance through her job as a university professor. Insurance that even covered a private caregiver." Sarah paled slightly. Eleanor continued, savoring each word. "So I wonder, why would a brilliant student abandon college to care for a patient who had all the necessary support? Unless there was another reason." "I don't understand where you're trying to go with this," Sarah replied, her voice slightly trembling. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Sarah's. "How about we talk about Dr. Richard Carter?" The name had the expected effect. Sarah became visibly tense, her hands gripping the fabric of her skirt. "He was your faculty advisor, wasn't he? A respected professional, married, father of 3 children. And curiously, he requested a transfer to another university exactly at the same time you dropped out." "That was a long time ago," Sarah managed to say, her voice firmer. "I don't see how it's relevant to my current position." "Oh, but it's extremely relevant." Eleanor smiled again, serving herself more tea. "You see, our family has a reputation to uphold. We can't afford to have people with questionable backgrounds working so close to us." "If you're insinuating something, I prefer that you be direct." Eleanor placed the cup on the table with a soft clink. "Very well. I have here," she touched a closed folder on her desk, "evidence of an inappropriate relationship between you and Dr. Carter. Evidence that, if made public, could be quite damaging for all parties involved." Sarah stood up abruptly, her legs trembling. "Are you blackmailing me?" "Blackmail is such a vulgar word," Eleanor responded calmly. "I prefer to think I'm protecting my family's interests. After all, how can I trust the care of my only grandson to someone with such a complex history?" "What happened back then?" Sarah began, but Eleanor interrupted her with a gesture. "I don't need the details. What I need is your cooperation. Continue your work with David, but maintain an appropriate distance from my son. Thomas is emotionally vulnerable since he lost his wife, and I won't allow him to be manipulated." Sarah straightened her shoulders, a determination arising in her eyes despite the contained tears. "You're making a mistake. I'm not who you think I am." "That," Eleanor responded coldly, "is exactly what worries me. You're dismissed, and remember, I'll be watching your every step in this house." When Sarah left the office, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The young woman clearly had her own demons to face, and now she, Eleanor, had the power to control them. What the matriarch didn't notice was the gleam of resolution in Sarah's eyes as she left the room. Because some truths, however painful they may be, need to be faced, and Sarah was tired of running from hers. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries. Sarah dove headfirst into her new routine, dividing herself between observing David's therapies and establishing a deeper connection with the boy. To her surprise and joy, Ethan had become a fundamental piece in this process. "Now, run your finger here," Ethan's voice patiently guided while holding David's. "Hand over a special sheet of paper. Can you feel the little dots forming the drawing?" The two boys were sitting on the floor of David's room, surrounded by sensory materials. Ethan had the idea to create a texture book for his new friend, using different materials to represent his favorite stories. Sarah observed the scene from the door, her heart overflowing with pride. Seeing her son, who previously could barely interact with other children due to anxiety, now teaching and sharing so naturally, was more than she could have dreamed. "Sarah?" Thomas's voice surprised her. He had approached silently, also observing the children. "Sorry, I was distracted." "Don't apologize," he smiled, indicating with a gesture for her to follow him. "Actually, I wanted to talk about something important." They walked to his office, a more welcoming environment than the rest of the mansion. With bookshelves covering the walls and a privileged view of the garden, Sarah noticed that Thomas seemed less tense than usual, although he still maintained his characteristic posture. "The therapist's reports arrived today," he began, sitting in his leather armchair. "In just 1 month, David has shown more progress than in the entire last year." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. "He's an amazing boy. He just needed to feel safe to express himself." "And you managed to create that safe environment," Thomas completed, a different sparkle in his eyes. "It's not just in the therapies. It's in the day-to-day, in the little things. Like this idea of the texture book that Ethan had. It was inspired by something you did with him, wasn't it?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed, remembering the nights when she created sensory games to calm her son's anxiety attacks. "Sometimes when we can't see a way out, we need to learn to feel the path." Thomas stood up, walking to the window. "You know, since I lost my wife, I've tried to do everything right. I hired the best specialists, bought the most advanced equipment, followed all the recommended protocols, but nothing really worked." Sarah remained silent, feeling that he needed to vent. "And then you arrive, with your incomplete knowledge of psychology and your improvised techniques, and in 1 month achieve more progress than years of expensive therapies." He turned to face her, a melancholic smile on his lips. "Do you know what that made me realize?" "What?" "That perhaps I was so concerned with doing everything technically perfect that I forgot the most important thing, the heart, the real human connection." Thomas's words touched something deep in Sarah. She too had spent so much time trying to do everything right, hiding her vulnerabilities that sometimes she forgot to simply feel. "That's why," he continued, "I want to make you a proposal. In addition to your work with David, I'd like you to develop your own therapeutic program, something that combines your intuitive techniques with theoretical foundation. We can hire academic consultants to assist you, and you would have total freedom to experiment and create." Sarah felt her heart accelerate. It was an incredible opportunity, the chance to transform her personal experiences into something that could help other families. But then, like a cold shower, she remembered the conversation with Eleanor Harrison. I don't know if that would be appropriate," she murmured, lowering her eyes. Thomas frowned, noticing her hesitation. "Why not? You clearly have a natural gift for this." "Your mother," Sarah began, but was interrupted by a sound coming from the hallway. "Mom! Mom!" It was Ethan's voice, excited. "You need to see what we made." The two boys entered the office, Ethan practically jumping with excitement while holding something in his hands. David was right behind him, a radiant smile on his face. "We made a special book," Ethan announced, extending his creation. "Each page has a different texture, and David can already guess all of them just by touching. Sarah carefully took the handmade book, noticing the care with which the textures had been glued, the small braille dots that Ethan had learned to make, the simple but meaningful stories they had created together. She looked at Thomas, who was observing the scene with a softened expression she had never seen before. At that moment, Eleanor Harrison's threats seemed distant. Because there in that office, something stronger than fears or secrets of the past was being born. A family was being born, built not by blood ties, but by invisible connections of the heart. Night was falling over the city when Sarah finally managed a moment of solitude in her new apartment. Ethan slept peacefully in his room, exhausted after another day of activities with David. Sitting on the balcony, she contemplated the city lights while her hands trembled slightly as she held a yellowed envelope. It was a letter from her mother written in her final days, which Sarah kept as both a treasure and a wound. Inside was the truth about Dr. Richard Carter, a truth that Eleanor Harrison had completely distorted in her threats. "You needed to tell someone the truth," Jessica's voice sounded from the other side of the video call on her cell phone. "You can't let Eleanor Harrison use this against you." Sarah ran her fingers over the letter, feeling the texture of the paper. "It's not that simple, Jessica. If I tell, other people could get hurt. Innocent people. And if you don't tell, will you let her control your life? Sarah, you didn't do anything wrong." A heavy sigh escaped Sarah's lips. Sometimes keeping a secret isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about protecting those we love. The sound of the doorbell interrupted the conversation. Sarah quickly said goodbye to Jessica and went to answer, surprised by a visit at that hour. Her heart almost stopped when she saw Thomas Harrison standing at her door. "Sorry about the time," he said, seeming strangely nervous, "but I needed to talk to you." Sarah invited him in, mentally thankful for having put away the letter before. Opening the door, Thomas walked to the balcony where she had been moments before. "Beautiful view," he commented distractedly, before turning to face her. "Sarah, did something happen between you and my mother?" The direct question caught her off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because since that meeting with her, you've changed. You're more reserved, especially with me. And today, when I mentioned your name during dinner, she made a peculiar comment." Sarah felt her blood freeze. "What kind of comment?" "Something about how not all people are who they appear to be," he answered, his eyes searching hers. "Sarah, if my mother did or said something inappropriate—" "It's not that," she interrupted him, feeling the weight of the secret in her chest. "Your mother just discovered some things about my past, things that she interpreted in the wrong way." Thomas took a step in her direction. "What things?" Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, making a decision. She walked to her purse and removed the letter. "This explains everything," she said, extending the envelope to him. "But before you read it, I need you to understand something. What's written here might change how you see certain people. People you respect." Thomas took the envelope carefully, as if he felt its emotional weight. "Does it have to do with why you left college?" "Yes." "And with Dr. Richard Carter?" The businessman frowned upon hearing the name. "The child psychology specialist? The one my mother always recommends?" Sarah nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. "Please, read it. And afterwards you decide what to do with this information." As Thomas read the letter, Sarah observed his face go through different emotions: surprise, shock, indignation, and finally, a painful understanding. "My God," he murmured when he finished, letting himself fall into a chair. "So that's why you abandoned your studies, to protect your mother." "She was a respected professor," Sarah explained, her voice choked. "When she discovered what Dr. Carter was doing with some students, she gathered evidence, prepared a formal complaint. But before she could present it, she discovered her illness. He threatened to use his influence to cut her health insurance, if the complaint came to light. And you took the blame," Thomas completed, finally understanding. "You let people think you had an affair with him, so your mother could maintain her treatment." Sarah wiped away a stubborn tear. "What choice did I have? She needed the treatment, and other girls needed to know they weren't alone." Even if I couldn't file the complaint, my leaving the program generated whispers, internal investigations. It was enough for him to request a transfer. A heavy silence fell over the balcony. Outside, the city continued its dance of lights, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that apartment. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Thomas finally asked. "Because your mother discovered only part of the story. The part that made her think I was some kind of opportunist. And I didn't want other people to get hurt because of my past." Thomas stood up abruptly, a new determination in his gaze. "This ends now. I won't allow my mother to use this against you. Not when you were the real victim in this story." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thomas, I don't want to cause problems between you and your mother." "You're not causing anything," he responded, his voice soft but firm. "And it's time for the truth to come out. All of it." What neither of them noticed, absorbed in their conversation, was the small figure of Ethan standing in the hallway, partially hidden by the shadow, absorbing every word of that revelation that would forever change the destiny of everyone in that house. The next morning dawned heavy with tension in the Harrison mansion. Eleanor was in her office reviewing documents when her secretary announced Thomas's arrival. Before she could respond, her son was already entering the room, an expression she rarely saw on his face, a mixture of disappointment and determination. "We need to talk about Sarah," he said without preamble, placing the letter on Eleanor's desk. The matriarch looked at the envelope with studied disinterest. "What is this?" "The truth," Thomas answered, his voice controlled but firm. "The truth that you distorted to try to manipulate a situation that you didn't fully understand." Eleanor picked up the letter with elegant fingers, her face a mask of serenity as she read. Only the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her growing disturbance. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" Thomas continued. "Dr. Carter wasn't the victim of a seductive student. He was the predator, and Sarah sacrificed her reputation to protect other people." "Thomas," Eleanor began, but he interrupted her. "No, Mother. This time you're going to listen to me. For years I've trusted your judgment. I accepted your interference in my life, in my decisions, because I believed you always knew what was best. But this went too far." Eleanor's mask of serenity began to crack. "Everything I did was to protect our family." "No," Thomas hit the desk, making Eleanor's teacup tremble. "You did this to maintain control, as you've always done since Emily left us, as if I were incapable of making my own decisions." "You were vulnerable." Eleanor raised her voice, standing up. "A young, attractive woman with a small child appearing out of nowhere and gaining David's trust. What was I supposed to think? You should have thought that maybe she was exactly what she appeared to be. Someone with a natural gift for helping special children. Someone who understands pain and overcoming because she's lived it herself." A heavy silence fell over the office. Outside, the sound of the piano indicated that David was in his music lesson, one of the few activities he maintained since before Sarah's arrival. "And now?" Eleanor finally asked, her voice lower. "Will you let her take over everything? Get closer and closer to you and David?" Thomas took a deep breath, controlling his irritation. "Now, you're going to do what you should have done from the beginning. Give her a fair chance. No threats, no manipulations, no secret investigations. And if I refuse, then I'll have to make a difficult decision," he answered, his tone surprisingly calm, "because I can't allow your fear of losing control to harm the progress David is making." Eleanor sat down again, suddenly looking older and more tired. "You don't understand, son. Since your wife left, seeing you and David suffer, it was as if a part of me was lost too. All I did was try to protect you." "I know, Mother," Thomas softened his voice. "But sometimes, protecting too much ends up suffocating. David is flourishing with Sarah. For the first time in years, he's really connecting with someone. And I'm finally seeing a path forward instead of being stuck in the past." The matriarch remained silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the letter on the desk. Finally, she spoke. "Dr. Carter is still one of the main advisors to the family foundation." "Not for long," Thomas responded firmly. as soon as this story comes to light. No, Eleanor interrupted abruptly. A scandal of this magnitude could destroy the Foundation's reputation. All the charitable projects, all the people who depend on us. Then what do you suggest? That we continue protecting a predator? Eleanor stood up again, walking to the window. She observed the garden below, where she could see Sarah arriving with Ethan and David, the three returning from some outdoor activity. The sound of the children's laughter reached all the way up there. Perhaps, she began slowly, perhaps there's a more discreet way to handle this, a way to do justice without destroying everything we've built. Thomas approached his mother, observing the same scene. What way would that be? Give me a few days, Eleanor answered, her tone returning to that of the strategist she always was. I need to think about how we can transform this situation into something positive, something that can really make a difference. Thomas studied his mother's face, looking for signs of manipulation, but this time he saw only a woman trying to find a way to fix her mistakes. 3 days, he established. After that, I'll do what I think is necessary. When Thomas left the office, Eleanor remained at the window, observing Sarah interacting with the children. There was grace in her movements, patience in her manner, genuine love in her actions. Perhaps, she reluctantly admitted to herself, it was time to learn to loosen the reins a bit. What she didn't know was that her decision in the next few days would not only change Sarah's destiny, but also open the way for a much greater transformation than anyone could imagine. Sarah was organizing sensory materials in David's room when Patricia, Thomas's assistant, appeared at the door with an intrigued expression. Sarah, Mrs. Eleanor would like to see you in her office, she announced, consulting her tablet. Now, if possible. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. After the revelation to Thomas the previous night, she expected some reaction from the matriarch, but not so quickly. With her heart racing, she asked one of the assistants to stay with the children and followed Patricia through the mansion's corridors. Eleanor was standing by the window when Sarah entered, a posture that reminded her so much of Thomas that it was impossible not to notice the family resemblance. Unlike their last meeting, however, there was something different in her expression. Sit down, Sarah. Eleanor indicated the chair, her voice surprisingly soft. Would you like some tea? No, thank you, Sarah replied, remaining alert. Eleanor served herself a cup before sitting down. Thomas showed me your mother's letter, she began directly. I must admit that I made an error in judgment. Sarah blinked, astonished. Of all the approaches she expected, a veiled apology was not among them. What your mother did was very courageous, Eleanor continued, and what you did to protect her, well, let's say it demonstrates a character that I failed to recognize initially. Mrs. Harrison, please let me finish. Eleanor raised a hand. I spent the entire night thinking about how to transform this situation into something constructive, and I've reached a conclusion. We need to use this experience to prevent other young women from going through the same thing. Sarah leaned slightly forward, intrigued. The Harrison Foundation has a support program for students in vulnerable situations, Eleanor explained. I'm proposing to expand this program to include a specific sector for psychological and legal support for cases of harassment and abuse in academic settings. That would be amazing, Sarah responded cautiously. And I would like you to actively participate in this project, Eleanor continued. Your personal experience, combined with your natural talent for understanding and helping people, would be invaluable. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, but contained them. And Dr. Carter? I've already arranged his discreet dismissal from all institutions linked to the Foundation, Eleanor answered with a gleam of determination in her eyes. And although we cannot publicly expose the case without compromising other people involved, I can guarantee that he will no longer have access to positions of power over vulnerable young women. A weight that Sarah had carried for years seemed to diminish on her shoulders. It wasn't the complete justice her mother had dreamed of, but it was a start, a way to transform pain into purpose. There's one more thing, Eleanor opened a drawer and removed a folder. "Here is your enrollment to resume your psychology degree next semester, with flexible hours that will allow you to continue your work with David." Sarah took the folder with trembling hands. "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor was silent for a moment, as if carefully choosing her words. "Because I learned, the hard way, that sometimes we need to admit our mistakes to allow something better to flourish." The sound of children's laughter came through the window. David and Ethan were playing in the garden, their voices carrying a pure joy that made everything else seem small in comparison. "They are extraordinary together, aren't they?" Eleanor commented, a genuine smile softening her features. David had never connected like this with anyone since he lost his sight. "Children have their own wisdom," Sarah replied. "They see beyond our adult limitations." Eleanor nodded, turning to Sarah with a serious expression. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately for the way I treated you, but I hope we can build something positive from here on, for the good of the children, the foundation, and all the other Sarahs who might need help in the future." Sarah felt a deep emotion take hold of her chest. It was more than a peace offering. It was a chance to transform her story of pain into something meaningful, something that could really make a difference in other people's lives. "I accept," she said simply, her voice loaded with determination. When she left Eleanor's office a few minutes later, Sarah stopped in the hallway to catch her breath. Through the window, she could see Ethan teaching David to identify different flowers by smell, an activity they had developed together. In the garden, Thomas observed the scene with a serene smile. It was as if the universe had finally aligned all the pieces of a puzzle that she didn't even know she was assembling. A puzzle made of past pains, transformative presents, and promising futures. The Harrison Foundation auditorium was packed that Thursday morning. Sarah observed from the wings as Eleanor Harrison presented the new Psychological and Legal Support program for university students. Her hands sweated slightly. In a few minutes, it would be her turn to take the stage. "And now," Eleanor's voice echoed through the speakers, "I would like to introduce the person who inspired this initiative. Sarah Wilson is not only a talented professional who has revolutionized our therapeutic accompaniment program, but also someone who knows firsthand the importance of having support in the most difficult moments." As she walked to the stage, Sarah felt the weight of her mother's pendant on her neck. It was as if she were there somehow, witnessing the moment when her silent struggle finally gained a voice. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, her voice firmer than expected. "I'm here today not only as a professional, but as someone who believes in the transformative power of truth and mutual support." In the front row, Thomas smiled encouragingly. Next to him, Ethan and David whispered something between themselves, their expressions attentive, even though the topic was too complex for their full understanding. "There are situations in academic life that go beyond the normal challenges of learning," continued Sarah. "Moments when we feel alone, vulnerable, not knowing who to turn to. The program we're launching today is born precisely from this need to create a protection and welcoming network." As Sarah detailed the program's functioning, she noticed several faces in the audience showing recognition. How many other stories like hers were there, silenced by fear or shame? "We're not just offering psychological and legal support," she explained. "We're creating a safe space where these voices can be heard, where these experiences can be transformed into strength and positive change." After the presentation, while receiving congratulations from those present, Sarah was surprised by a young woman who approached shyly. "Excuse me," the girl said, her eyes watery. I need to tell you something that happened to me." Sarah felt her heart tighten, recognizing the same fear she herself had carried for so long. "Shall we talk in a quieter place?" In the next 2 hours, Sarah heard not just one, but 3 different students share their stories of harassment and abuse. Each account confirmed the urgency and importance of the program being implemented. When she finally managed a moment of pause, she found Thomas waiting for her in the hallway. "You were incredible," he said, his eyes shining with admiration. "Do you see how many people you're already helping?" Sarah felt the tears she had held back all morning finally escape. "It's as if a cycle is closing, you know? As if all that suffering finally made sense." "Mom!" Ethan's voice interrupted the moment. He and David were running in her direction, followed closely by Eleanor. "Did you see how many people came to hear you?" "I did, sweetheart," Sarah smiled, bending down to hug her son. "I couldn't see," David commented, his voice soft, "but I could feel that it was important. There was a different kind of silence when you were speaking." Eleanor approached, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "This is just the beginning. We already have 3 universities interested in implementing the program. And that's not all," Thomas added. "Remember your idea to develop specific therapeutic techniques for visually impaired children?" Sarah nodded, remembering the conversations they had had about expanding the work she did with David. "The foundation wants to finance a specialized center," he continued. "A place where you can not only apply your techniques, but also train other professionals." "What?" Sarah gasped, hardly believing what she was hearing. "You have a special gift, Sarah," Eleanor intervened. "It would be selfish of us to keep it restricted only to our family. Other children deserve the chance to benefit from your work." Sarah looked at the 2 boys, who were now playing a game they had invented together, where Ethan described colors using sensations and David tried to guess. It was amazing how they had created their own language of mutual understanding. "And what do you think?" Thomas asked softly. "Are you ready to take this next step?" Sarah touched her pendant, feeling her mother's strength flowing through it. She thought about all the other children who could be helped, about all the families who could find hope through her work. "Yes," she finally answered, her voice loaded with determination. "I'm ready." What none of them could imagine at that moment was that this decision would not only change their lives, but would also become the beginning of a silent revolution in the way society dealt with special children and their families. A revolution built not on grand gestures, but on the deep understanding that each person, regardless of their limitations, deserves the chance to be truly seen and understood. The weeks following the program's launch were intense. Sarah divided her time between classes at college, which she had resumed with renewed enthusiasm, her work with David, and the planning meetings for the new therapeutic center. In the midst of all this hustle, something unexpected began to flourish. It was a Saturday afternoon when Thomas found her in the garden, watching the children play. Ethan and David had developed their own communication system, gentle touches, specific sounds, and detailed descriptions that allowed them to share their experiences of the world. "It's amazing how they understand each other, isn't it?" Thomas commented, sitting next to her on the garden bench. "Yes," Sarah smiled. "Ethan told me the other day that David helps him with his anxiety because he knows what it's like when the world gets too big." Thomas was silent for a moment, observing his son laugh at something Ethan had whispered. "You know, since Emily passed away, I was afraid David would never find that connection with someone again, that he would be forever trapped in his own world of darkness." Sarah felt her heart accelerate at the mention of Emily. It was the first time Thomas had spontaneously spoken about his late wife. "Sometimes," she responded softly, "we just need to find the right language to communicate. Each person has their own way of seeing and feeling the world. Like you did from day one," he turned to face her. "You didn't just see David's blindness, you saw him, all of him." Their gazes met, and Sarah felt something different in the air, a soft electricity, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. "Thomas, Dad, Sarah!" David's voice interrupted the moment. "Come here, we invented a new game." The children had organized a sort of sensory circuit in the garden, using different textures and materials. Ethan guided David with precise instructions, while the other boy advanced with growing confidence. "Now you, Dad," David called, extending a blindfold. "You need to try it without seeing too." Thomas looked hesitantly at Sarah, who smiled encouragingly. "Come on, be brave," she teased. To everyone's surprise, he accepted the blindfold and allowed the boys to guide him through the circuit. His steps were unsure at first, but gradually he loosened up, laughing along with the children. "This is how David experiences the world every day," Ethan explained enthusiastically. "Cool, right?" "Extraordinary," Thomas replied, removing the blindfold after completing the course. His eyes found Sarah's again, loaded with emotion. "Absolutely extraordinary." Eleanor, who was observing the scene from the veranda, smiled discreetly before withdrawing. It was the first time in years she had seen her son truly happy, truly present in the moment. Later, while the children were having dinner, Sarah was organizing some materials in the library when Thomas appeared at the door. "We need to talk," he said, his voice soft but determined. Sarah felt her heart jump. About how you changed our lives. Not just David's, but mine too," he approached slowly. "About how, for the first time since I lost Emily, I feel I can breathe again." "Thomas," Sarah began, but he raised his hand, asking to continue. "I'm not asking for anything," he assured. "I just want you to know that what's happening here in this house goes beyond a professional arrangement. You and Ethan, you've brought something back to our lives, something I thought I had lost forever." Sarah felt tears form in her eyes. "I feel that too," she admitted softly. "Seeing Ethan flourish, seeing David open up, it's as if we found a place where we can finally be ourselves with all our complexities." Thomas took another step in her direction, his gaze intense but gentle. "Then maybe we can discover together where this will lead us. No rush, no pressure, just letting it happen naturally." Like the children, Sarah smiled through her tears. One step at a time, discovering the path as we move forward. The sound of the boys' laughter echoed through the house, a perfect soundtrack for that moment of mutual understanding. There, in the library of the Harrison mansion, two souls hurt by life began to understand that sometimes love arrives not like lightning, but like a gentle breeze that heals wounds and builds bridges between lonely hearts. The abandoned building in the city center didn't seem very promising at first sight, but Sarah could see beyond the peeling walls and dusty windows. In her mind, she already visualized the transformations. Welcoming rooms with different textures on the walls, a sensory garden where children could explore aromas and sensations, adapted spaces for individual and group therapies. "Are you sure it's here?" Jessica asked, observing the place with skepticism. Her friend had taken the afternoon off from the hospital where she worked as a nurse to help Sarah with the initial ideas for the therapeutic center. "Trust me," Sarah smiled, walking through the empty space. "This place has potential. It's central, accessible by public transportation, and has enough space for everything we're planning." And Thomas approved. Actually, Sarah blushed slightly, he was the one who suggested it. The building belongs to the Harrison Foundation and had been unused for years. Jessica raised an eyebrow, a mischievous smile on her lips. He's been suggesting a lot of things lately, hasn't he?" Sarah ignored her friend's provocation, focusing on making notes on her tablet. The last few months had been intense, between planning the center, classes at college, and her work with David. And yes, there was also that growing closeness with Thomas, that silent dance of glances and gestures that neither of them dared to name yet. "Here," Sarah pointed to a wide space on the ground floor, "we can create a living area, a place where parents can exchange experiences while the children are in therapy. Do you know how many times I wished I had this when Ethan was younger?" Speaking of Ethan, Jessica interrupted, "How is he handling all these changes?" Sarah's face lit up. "Amazing. It's as if he's found his purpose helping David. Just yesterday he surprised me by creating a new sensory game to teach math." "How so?" "He used different textures to represent numbers and operations. David loved it, and now he wants to teach it to other blind children he met in the music therapy sessions." Jessica observed her friend with affection. "Who would have thought, huh? From waitress to director of an innovative therapeutic center, your mother would be so proud." Sarah instinctively touched the pendant on her neck, her eyes welling up. "Sometimes I think she somehow planned all this, you know, as if every difficult moment had prepared us for where we are now." The sound of footsteps interrupted the conversation. Thomas entered the building, followed by a group of architects. "And Eleanor." "Sarah," He smiled upon seeing her, that smile that in recent times seemed reserved just for her. "I see you're already planning the changes." "I was showing the space to Jessica," she explained, introducing her friend. "We have so many ideas." "And we want to hear all of them," Eleanor intervened, her posture softer than usual. "The architects are here precisely for that. We want this place to reflect your vision, Sarah." In the next 2 hours, the group discussed possibilities and changes. Sarah passionately explained every detail she had imagined, the colors that would work best for children with low vision, the types of flooring that would help with spatial orientation, the spaces that would need special acoustic treatment. "And here," she indicated an area on the first floor, "I'd like to create a sensory library, with braille books, audiobooks, and tactile materials that help tell stories. Like those that Ethan and David make?" Thomas asked, his eyes shining. "Exactly. In fact," Sarah hesitated for a moment, "I was thinking of inviting them to be our junior consultants. They have incredible ideas that we would never have thought of as adults." Eleanor, who had been observing everything attentively, stepped forward. "I think it's an excellent idea. No one better than the children themselves to tell us what works or doesn't." One of the architects made a comment about deadlines and costs, but Eleanor interrupted him with a gesture. "The foundation will provide all necessary support. This project is too special to be limited by financial issues." Sarah felt a wave of emotion pass through her. It was surreal to see her dream taking shape so quickly, to have people believing in her ideas and willing to invest in them. When the group began to disperse to take measurements and photos, Thomas approached Sarah. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "More than happy," she responded, her eyes shining. "It's as if everything finally makes sense, you know? Every difficult moment, every obstacle, everything brought us here." He took her hand, discreetly, a gesture that had become more frequent in recent days. "You deserve this, Sarah. You deserve all the good things that are happening." Jessica, who was observing the scene from a distance, smiled to herself. It was as if the universe was finally conspiring in favor of her friend, transforming years of struggle into a promising future. What none of them could imagine at that moment was that that abandoned building would become much more than a therapeutic center. It would be the catalyst for a transformation that would affect not only the lives of special children and their families, but also the way society viewed difference and inclusion. Night was falling over the city when Sarah found Ethan and David, whispering excitedly in the latter's room. Spread across the floor were various craft materials, papers with different textures, and what appeared to be a project in development. "What are you two up to?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Surprise!" Ethan quickly replied, trying to hide something under a book. "You can't see it yet, Mom." David laughed, his hands running smoothly over what seemed to be a special notebook. "It's a gift for the center's inauguration," he explained. "Dad said it will be in 2 weeks. Sarah felt her heart melt. Seeing the boys so involved with the project, wanting to contribute in their own way, was more than she could have dreamed of. "All right, I won't peek," she promised, making a motion to leave. "But don't stay up too late, okay?" "Sarah," David's voice called her back. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you like my dad?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. Ethan stopped what he was doing, also interested in the answer. Well, Sarah stammered, feeling her face heat up. "Because he smiles differently when you're around," David continued, his heightened perception catching nuances that many adults would miss. "I can't see, but I can hear it in his voice. It's lighter, happier." Ethan nodded emphatically. "It's true, and you're different too, Mum. Your eyes shine more." Sarah sat on the edge of David's bed, trying to organize her thoughts. How to explain something that she herself was still trying to understand. "Your dad is a very special person," she began carefully. "And yes, I care very much about him." "Like he cared about my mom?" David asked innocently. The room fell silent for a moment. Sarah felt her heart tighten, aware of the delicacy of that territory. "David," she said softly, No one will ever replace your mum. She will always be an important part of your life, and your dad's too. I know, the boy responded with wisdom, beyond his years. But I think she would be happy to know we're not sad all the time anymore. Ethan, who had approached, took David's hand. When I get sad thinking about my dad that I never knew, David helps me think about good things. Now I have him as a brother. Sarah fought against the tears threatening to fall. It was amazing how children could simplify issues that adults so complicated. The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced Thomas's arrival. He stopped at the door, observing the scene with curiosity. "Family meeting?" he asked with a smile. "Dad," David called excitedly. "Come here. We're making a secret project for the new center." Thomas entered the room, sitting on the floor with the children. Sarah observed how he naturally fit into that moment, how his presence completed the picture in a way that seemed predestined. "Sarah," he called softly, "aren't you going to join us?" She slid to the floor, forming a circle with them. The boys soon turned their attention back to the mysterious project, talking in excited whispers. "They're plotting something," Thomas commented in a low voice, just for Sarah to hear. "Apparently, it's a surprise for the inauguration," she replied in the same tone. Their gazes met, and in that moment something silent but profound passed between them. It was as if the children's words had opened a door that both had been hesitating to cross. "Sarah," Thomas began, his voice almost a whisper, "after the boys fall asleep, can we talk?" She nodded, her heart accelerating with the promise contained in that simple request. Because sometimes the biggest changes begin with the simplest words, with the quietest moments, with the truths that children can see with such clarity. On the floor between them, Ethan and David continued their secret work, their laughter filling the room with a joy that was both new and familiar. It was as if the universe had finally aligned all the pieces, transforming 4 lonely hearts into something larger, something more complete, something that perhaps could be called family. After the children finally fell asleep, Sarah found Thomas in the winter garden. The night was surprisingly clear, with the full moon pouring its silvery light through the glass ceiling, creating soft shadows among the plants. "Tea?" he offered, indicating the elegant service arranged on the center table. Sarah accepted with a nervous smile, sitting on the sofa. The silence between them was different now, loaded with expectations and unspoken words. "It's funny," Thomas began, serving tea in fine porcelain cups, "how children manage to see everything with such clarity." Sarah held her cup with both hands, seeking comfort in its warmth. "They have a special way of simplifying things." "David asked me an interesting question this morning," he continued, his eyes meeting hers. "He asked if I still remembered what it was like to be in love." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "And what did you answer?" "I said I had forgotten for a long time." Thomas put his cup on the table, turning completely toward her. "But that recently, someone was helping me remember." Sarah felt the blush rise up her neck. "Thomas, please let me continue," he asked softly. "When I lost Emily, I thought I would never be able to feel anything like it again. I immersed myself in work, in therapies for David, in anything that could fill the void. But then you appeared, with your silent strength and your enormous heart." He paused, as if searching for the right words. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something deeper, more gradual. It was seeing how you treated David not as a disabled child, but as a complete human being. It was observing your dedication to Ethan, your honesty even in the most difficult situations, your ability to transform pain into purpose. Sarah put her cup next to his, her hands trembling slightly. "I felt fear at the beginning too," she admitted. "Fear of falling in love, of trusting, of allowing someone to enter the small world I had built with Ethan." "And now?" Thomas asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Now." She took a deep breath, finding courage somewhere deep within herself. "Now, I realize that sometimes love comes not to fill a void, but to expand, something that's already complete." Thomas extended his hand, touching her face softly. "Sarah, I'm not asking you to replace anyone. I don't want you to be a new mother for David, just as I don't intend to replace the father Ethan never knew. I want to build something new, something ours. Like a garden. She smiled through the tears that began to form. Exactly, he smiled back. A garden where we can all grow together, each in our own way. Sarah closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. The children have been planning this for a long time. Did you know? Thomas laughed softly. Yes, David has been quite direct about the matter. Just yesterday he asked me why I hadn't officially asked you to be my girlfriend yet. And why haven't you? She opened her eyes, finding his fixed on her face. Because I wanted to do it right, he answered, his hand sliding to hold hers. Sarah, Wilson, would you do me the honor of building this garden with me? Of discovering together how to make this peculiar and wonderful family flourish? Sarah felt her heart overflow with emotion. It was different from any other moment in her life. There was no desperation, no rush, just the quiet certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Yes, she answered simply, her voice carrying all the promises that single word contained. The kiss that followed was gentle, full of tenderness and possibilities. When they separated, both were laughing and crying at the same time, like teenagers discovering love for the first time. You know what's funnier? Sarah commented, nestling in his arms. I'm almost certain I heard a celebratory noise coming from the hallway. Thomas laughed. We probably have a very interested audience hiding out there. As if to confirm his suspicion, the sound of poorly contained giggles echoed through the winter garden, followed by hurried footsteps moving away. I think we just received the official approval, Sarah smiled. There, under the moonlight that penetrated through the glass ceiling, two souls who had known pain found a new beginning. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending, but something much more valuable. It was the beginning of a shared journey, built on understanding, respect, and a love that had grown naturally, like a flower that finds its way through concrete. The week preceding the inauguration of the New Horizons Therapeutic Center was a whirlwind of activities. Sarah supervised the final details of the decoration while balancing her college classes and the preparations for the grand presentation that the children would give during the ceremony. Here, Mum, Ethan called, running down the freshly painted corridor. We finished the surprise. He and David had spent days working on their secret project, always hiding when any adult approached. Now finally ready to reveal, they could barely contain their excitement. It's a sensory book, David explained, his hands running proudly over the decorated cover with different textures. But it's not just for blind children, it's for everyone. To learn together. Sarah carefully took the book, moved as she flipped through the pages. Each one contained a simple story, told both in printed words and in Braille, with tactile illustrations that the children had created using various materials. We want it to be the first book in the library, Ethan explained, and afterward, we can teach other children to make them too. It's perfect, Sarah whispered, hugging them both. Absolutely perfect. What's perfect? Eleanor's voice sounded from the door. The Harrison matriarch had arrived for a final inspection before the inauguration. Grandma! David ran in her direction, guiding himself by the sound of her voice with the confidence he had developed in recent months. Come see what we made. Eleanor carefully took the book, and Sarah noticed something she had never seen before. Tears. In the eyes of the always controlled lady. You did this by yourselves? She asked, her voice slightly choked. Yes, Ethan answered proudly. I would draw and explain it to David, and he would choose the right textures for each part of the story. And you know what's coolest, Grandma, David added. We wrote about a different kind of family, one that met by chance and chose each other through love. Eleanor raised her eyes to Sarah, a silent understanding passing between them. How far they had come since that first tense conversation in her office. You know, Eleanor began, sitting on one of the colorful poofs in the new library. When I was young, I thought family was something fixed, defined only by blood and tradition. I needed a long time and two extraordinary children to understand that family is something we build with love, patience, and acceptance. Sarah felt her heart tighten with Eleanor's unexpected honesty. Ethan and David sat beside, her attentive to the story that was beginning to unfold. "When we lost Emily," Eleanor continued, her voice soft, "I thought our family was irreparably broken. I built walls to protect us without realizing I was just isolating us from the love that could heal us. But now we're an even bigger family," David smiled, "with Sarah, Ethan, and all the children who will come to the center." Eleanor caressed her grandson's face tenderly. "Yes, my love, a family that grows not because of what it lost, but because of what it chose to find." The sound of footsteps announced Thomas's arrival, who stopped at the door observing the scene with a smile. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked. "No, Dad," David called excitedly. "Grandma is helping us organize the library for tomorrow." "And, speaking of tomorrow," Eleanor stood up, resuming her professional posture, although her eyes remained soft. "We still have a lot to prepare. The press will arrive early, and I want everything perfect for the big day." As Eleanor left with the children to check other details, Thomas approached Sarah, embracing her from behind. "Nervous?" he asked softly. "A little," she admitted, leaning back against him. "But it's a good nervousness, as if we're about to start something really important. And we are." He kissed her temple affectionately. "Something that goes far beyond a therapeutic center. We're creating a space where other families can find hope, where other children can discover their own light." Sarah turned in his arms, looking at the man who had become not just her companion, but her partner in a dream bigger than themselves. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For believing. In me, in the children, in this possibility of a new beginning." The kiss they shared was interrupted by giggles coming from the door. Ethan and David had returned stealthily. "Hey, you two," Thomas called in a playful tone. "Weren't you supposed to be helping Grandma?" "We just wanted to see if everything was okay here," Ethan answered with a feigned innocence that made everyone laugh. On that eve of inauguration, as the sun set casting golden hues through the center's windows, Sarah felt a deep certainty settle in her heart. It wasn't just a new chapter that would begin tomorrow. It was the continuation of a story of love, overcoming, and discoveries. A story that had begun with an unlikely encounter in a restaurant and now expanded to touch other lives, other families, other hearts in search of light. The day of the New Horizons Therapeutic Center inauguration dawned radiant. Sarah observed the growing movement of people arriving, while adjusting Ethan's new dress shirt collar for the 10th time. "Mom, there are so many people," he commented, half anxious, half excited. "Do you think they'll like our presentation?" "They'll love it," she assured him, kissing the top of his head. "You and David practiced a lot. Everything is perfect." The main hall of the center was unrecognizable. The once peeling walls now displayed vibrant colors and different textures. Sensory panels decorated the corridors, and the soft aroma of lavender filled the environment, creating a welcoming atmosphere. "Sarah," Eleanor approached hurriedly, "the journalists have already arrived and want some photos of you with the children in the sensory library." Before Sarah could respond, David appeared running, followed by Thomas, who was trying unsuccessfully to prevent him from wrinkling his new clothes. "Ethan," he called excitedly, "come on. We need to organize the books the right way before the presentation." The children ran off, leaving the adults behind with indulgent smiles. It was impossible not to be infected by that pure and hopeful energy. "Is everything ready?" Thomas asked softly, adjusting a loose strand of Sarah's hair. "Almost." She took a deep breath. "Just one thing left." Sarah took a weathered envelope from her pocket, her mother's letter. "I want to put this in the time capsule we're burying today." Along with the children's first book and the other objects, Thomas immediately understood the symbolism of the gesture. That letter, which held a story of pain and sacrifice, would now become part of the foundation of something new and hopeful. The inauguration ceremony began promptly at 10. The auditorium was packed. Families with special children, professionals in the field, press, and curious onlookers. Eleanor opened the event with a surprisingly emotional speech. "Today, we're not just inaugurating a therapeutic center," her strong voice echoed through the room. "We're inaugurating a space of transformation where differences are not limitations but possibilities. A place born from a mother's love for her son, which expanded to embrace other families, other stories. Sarah felt tears come to her eyes when Eleanor continued, "This is the story of Sarah Wilson, who began as a waitress in our restaurant and today directs this center. It's the story of my grandson David, who through friendship with Ethan, learned that we don't need to see with our eyes to see the best in people." The most touching moment, however, was the children's presentation. Ethan and David took the stage hand in hand, followed by 5 other children who were already participating in the center's pilot project. Today, Ethan began, his small but firm voice in the microphone, "We want to show that everyone can learn together, no matter how we see, hear, or feel the world." The children then presented a series of activities they had created: sensory games, adapted stories, music with special instruments. David at the piano played a melody he had composed especially for the occasion, his small hands sliding confidently across the keys. "This music," he explained to the audience, "is about how colors sound to me. Yellow is happy like high notes, blue is calm like low notes, and love sounds like all the notes together making harmony." There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium when the children finished their presentation. Sarah, standing in the wings, felt her heart almost explode with pride and emotion. The time capsule ceremony was the highlight of the event. Each item placed inside represented a part of the journey that had brought them there. The first sensory book created by Ethan and David, her mother's letter, a piano ribbon that Emily had given to her son before departing, photographs, dreams, written on special paper. "In 10 years, Thomas announced, we will open this capsule to remember how it all began. But more important than that is what we'll build until then." As the capsule was buried in the center's sensory garden, Sarah looked around. She saw families meeting, special children interacting without fear or judgment, professionals exchanging experiences. She saw Eleanor, surprisingly, on her knees, on the ground with a blind girl, learning to see flowers through touch. And there, in that moment, Sarah understood that sometimes the greatest miracles begin in the most unlikely places, like an ordinary night in a restaurant, when a tired waitress decided to see beyond appearances and touch a heart closed in darkness. 6 months after the inauguration, the New Horizons Therapeutic Center had already become a national reference. On a quiet autumn afternoon, Sarah observed from her office window as a group of children explored the sensory garden under the watchful supervision of therapists. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas's voice surprised her. He had arrived silently, bringing 2 coffees. "About how life takes unexpected turns," she smiled, accepting the cup. "A year ago I was waiting tables, worried if I could pay the rent for the month. And now you're transforming lives," he completed, embracing her from behind as they observed the garden together. Down below, Ethan and David were leading an activity they had created, a discovery circuit where blindfolded children were guided by others to explore different sensations. The most impressive thing was seeing how the children naturally took turns in the roles, with no distinction between those who could see and those who couldn't. "You know what David told me yesterday?" Thomas commented, his voice soft, "that he doesn't remember anymore what it feels like to be alone." Sarah felt tears come to her eyes. Ethan said something similar, that now he understands that being different doesn't mean being wrong. The sound of children's laughter filled the air when one of the children discovered a new musical instrument hidden in the garden. Eleanor, who spent more and more time at the center, was sitting on one of the benches, helping a small girl read one of the sensory books that now filled the library. "Sometimes I wonder what Emily would think of all this," Thomas said quietly. Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "I'm sure she would be proud of the center, of David, of how you found strength to rebuild your life without ever forgetting her." A soft smile appeared on his lips. "Did you know I found a diary of hers the other day? In the last pages, she wrote about her greatest fear. That David would grow up without knowing joy, that I would close myself off to love. And look," Sarah smiled through the tears that now flowed freely, "how wrong she was." The moment was interrupted by knocks on the door. It was Jessica, who now coordinated the nursing department of the center. "Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." They followed Jessica to the music room, where an extraordinary scene was unfolding. David was at the piano, playing a soft melody, while Ethan guided the hands of a newly arrived blind girl over the keys. "See?" Ethan explained patiently. "Each note has a story, like the books we make, only with sounds." The girl smiled, enchanted, her small hands discovering a new world through music. Around them, other children listened attentively, some drawing what the music made them feel, others moving gently to the rhythm. "They are extraordinary," Eleanor commented, having silently joined the group. "All of them." Sarah observed the scene with her heart overflowing. There were all the pieces of her life, united in a way she could never have imagined. Ethan, her little warrior who had transformed into a natural mentor for other children. David, who through music and love had found his own light. Thomas, who had learned that love can take many forms and all of them are valid. Eleanor, who had discovered that family goes far beyond blood and tradition. And herself, who had transformed years of struggle and sacrifice into a legacy of hope and transformation. "Sarah," Thomas called softly, "there's something I want to ask you." She turned to him, noticing a special gleam in his eyes. "Actually," he continued, "it's something the children helped me prepare." As if on cue, Ethan and David interrupted the music and came running in their direction, huge smiles on their faces. "Mom," Ethan began, holding her hand, "you always said that family is who we choose with our hearts, right? And we chose a long time ago," David completed, holding her other hand. Thomas knelt before her, taking a small box from his pocket. Inside, there wasn't a traditional ring, but a delicate pendant, an exact replica of the one her mother had given her, with space for 2 more photos. "To complete your story," he explained, his voice choked with emotion, "so that the past and future can exist together in harmony. Sarah Wilson, do you accept officially becoming part of this peculiar and wonderful family we've built together?" Sarah looked around, at the children anxiously awaiting her answer, at Eleanor, who smiled with tears in her eyes, at Jessica, who was discreetly filming everything. She looked at the center they had created together, at the lives they were transforming, at the love they had found in the most unexpected places. "Yes," she responded, her voice full of certainty and emotion. "1,000 times yes." The applause and shouts of joy that followed echoed throughout the entire center. Ethan and David jumped with joy. Other children joined the celebration, and for a magical moment all differences disappeared. There was only love, pure and simple, filling every space, every heart. Because sometimes love isn't a lightning.